Thank you so much for coming. My name is Marcus Eng. I'm the current head at Starboard Ventures for business development, but I'm not really here to talk about work per se. I'm here to talk about something that I actually really care about. I've been in cryptocurrency since I was 14 years old, about 10 years ago. It's the only industry I've ever really known, and I've seen it grow into the behemoth that it's become today. And I'm here to talk about it. When asked about the benefits of blockchain, it is almost second nature for all of us to speak of immutable ledgers, transparency, and decentralization. Together, these three factors form the basis of security for blockchain and allows potential for a trustless system. That is, a system that does not require mediation from a discretionary party or oversight from a centralized body. A system where trust in a counterparty is not required to fulfill a transaction. I feel it is quite a pity that we have to remind folks that a large portion of crypto was originally set up to be the foundations of a trustless system. The big irony of crypto supporters is that many enter for the decentralization just to keep their tokens on centralized platforms, leaving them knowingly or unknowingly without many of the inherent benefits of the blockchain. Trusting a system that requires trust ultimately leaves your fate in the hands of the entity in control of the keys. As the popular saying goes, not your keys, not your crypto. Perhaps this may be fine in an ideal world. A world where there are no bad actors, but that is so far from the reality. Centralized systems have shown to be the most vulnerable to misfortune. As recent events show, there are some characters that have chosen to make unsavory decisions to save themselves over their supporters, their investors, and their believers. Those that have been in crypto a few cycles can see that history oftentimes repeats. Mt. Gox, Cryptsy, BitConnect, 3AC, Babel, HODLNOT, and the list goes on. In fact, there was a new addition recently. All these entities are centralized and gone, leaving only the disillusioned in their wake. Although DeFi is far from perfect, it seems like centralized finance in crypto is the most vulnerable to this misfortune. Stealing a headline from Bankless, CeFi broke, but DeFi did not. It gives crypto a bad name to evangelize a trustless system only to have the industry plagued by issues of trust. It is a tragic irony and prevents many from staying in the space or exploring it long enough in the first place. Those of us that have managed to avoid the recent catastrophes can breathe a sigh of relief for having survived, but many others unfortunately have not. It is they, not I, who have suffered. But what kind of industry would we be if that is the mentality that we all had? The implosion of CeFi has taken out a vast swath of newcomers that otherwise may have stayed long enough to eventually contribute. It has given crypto as a whole a bad name and reaffirmed many a stubborn mindset that crypto is too dangerous or even worse, entirely a scam, as my mother oftentimes reminds me. The industry itself suffers every time newcomers are decimated through shadowy or immoral practices that don't rightly reflect the principles of blockchain. To paraphrase Toto's Africa, we must seek to cure what's deep inside, frightened of this thing that we've become. We as an industry, we as the supporters of this industry must ask ourselves, why does this keep happening over and over again? Cycle after cycle, people get burned and wrecked. Is it a rite of passage? Does everybody need to be ripped off? But I suppose for me to espouse a trustless system, I must talk about what is a trustless system. At its most basic terms, it means that trust in the counterparty is not needed to transact. That you don't need to trust the exchange, you don't need to trust the other guy. It just happens because we know that this is what is supposed to happen. Usually this is achieved by having transparency in things including code and organizational structure. Now, crypto has always been a tale of two cities, centralized and decentralized. There's a place for both. But one city is strongly growing stronger than the other. And if we don't back up the weaker one, it'll be gone forever. And then what will we be, except what we have sought to replace? This transparency would allow a don't trust but verify attitude. However, this brings up a number of issues in itself. Not everyone knows how to verify. Imagine the typical user persona of somebody that's new to cryptocurrency, the crypto curious. Not many of them have the ability to independently verify a protocol's true function by combing through code. Some go straight to CeFi, while some, irregardless, try their hands at DeFi. Some don't even bother to. Some folks don't even try to verify, but immediately trust that this system on DeFi is a trustless system, which can lead them to put their money in untrustworthy dApps with nefarious backdoors. Eventually, they may encounter a rugging in a project that will leave a distaste for independent exploration of the DeFi ecosystem. This leads them to search for someone that can verify on their behalf. Groupthink is strong in crypto. It has always been. Most likely now, the rugged crypto curious will default to a key opinion leader that is likely sponsored by a centralized entity that has the marketing power to present itself as a platform run by crypto experts that deserve their trust. Sadly, some CeFi providers collapse, and the crypto curious become the crypto skeptic, having been rugged by both DeFi and CeFi. Whereupon, they leave the space angry and dissatisfied, and every Thanksgiving dinner, you'll hear about it over and over again. You led me into a scam. Thus, the cycle continues. Perhaps to the shock to some of you, and no surprise to others, this user persona is not limited to retail. Many unfamiliar institutions trying their hand at crypto, and even some thought-leading firms in other industries, have defaulted to a follow-the-leader mindset as well. If you would like an example, please look at the 3 Arrows creditors. Why did they fall for it? Well, aside from the allure of easy money, of obtaining yields unable to be found on DeFi, why did these creditors choose to trust the individuals in 3 Arrows rather than a transparent, trustless system? The psychological maneuvering performed by nefarious entities to manufacture trust and a false sense of security is done to provide what I call a semblance of trust, to portray themselves as trustworthy, irregardless of what they actually are. Sadly, this is not limited to CeFi projects as well. Certain DeFi projects, especially those in the early BSC era, many early chains, they did this by copying the layout and functions of other successful trustless dApps, leading many to trust but not verify. 3 Arrows did this by putting up a front on Twitter, touting their balance sheet. I'm so rich, I'm so smart, you should listen to me, this is too complex for you to understand. Well, trust, don't verify. The semblance of trust is dangerous because it leads many to that mindset. But why be in this position in the first place? Why do we seek to trust in an entity or individual when we could trust the trustless system? Perhaps it's the nature of humans to seek comfort in another person rather than a complicated system, or worse yet, a machine. Humans are drawn to the easiest solution, which right now is to trust somebody who told them something. Maybe we are drawn to it. Perhaps we need to make the easiest solution to be an easier way to verify. I think this is possibly where the issue lies. How do we make trustless systems easier to verify? And how do we give comfort to those that yearn for someone to trust, to ultimately have them trust the trustless system? So how do we make the trustless part of crypto more accessible to those who are unable to verify what to trust? To be frank, I don't know. If I did, I would be a much bigger deal and so much more richer. But quoting an article from Forbes in 2019, when it comes to trust, people don't want something entirely new. They want the familiar done differently. So what are institutions familiar with? Legal clarity, perhaps? Certain organizational structures? Someone to speak to, perhaps? How many of us here groan whenever we hear a mechanical voice on the other end of a phone line? Or to find our questions redirected to an FAQ. We crave human interaction and reassurance in situations of anxiety. Dealing with the unfamiliar causes so much anxiety, and there's nothing more unfamiliar than crypto to somebody who's entirely new. The easiest, most default path we have in these situations is to find somebody to speak to. Interpersonal relationships is a characteristic of business, for better or worse, since the dawn of humankind. Ever since business has been invented, we have thought of somebody else as who we're interacting with. And to change that mindset overnight in this industry is a crazy thing. We're changing literally human nature to trust the machine over a person. To change a practice as old as humanity itself is no easy task, and careful consideration should be taken to ease this transition into a trustless world. So who here uses Discord to communicate within crypto, right? Who here uses Twitter to talk to people, find out stuff, industry leaders? Modern technology has brought us closer together than ever before. We could talk to a CEO of a multinational corporation, billions of dollars, and he might just reply. Captains of industry like CZ, Vitalik, Elon Musk, and SBF, I wrote that way before this happened, are able to showcase their humanity by airing out their thoughts on Twitter. It allows us to see them as individuals beyond the companies they represent. Founders are able to speak directly to their audience and the average person. All this is done to reassure them and to foster trust on the basis of a familiarity. People gravitate to what is familiar, and nothing is more so familiar than human interaction. It's probably why corporations spend so much money to sound human on Twitter. All of this works well and fine for retail. But for institutions, there is very little such comfort in the crypto space. The standards required by institutions to make decisions are typically so much higher. Discord and Twitter will simply not suffice as proper means of communication when millions of dollars and the jobs of hundreds of people are at stake. We cannot go off the word of strangers online either. Institutions, like people, crave the human face of business. To be able to tell your boss, stakeholders, or colleagues that a doxed person from the counterparty's entity has told you something is not just reassuring, but protects you legally from many of the issues that can arise. It means that if you are told something that was not true, that you had been misled and potentially even a victim of fraud. However, if you were to make the same claims based on an FAQ sheet, that it leaves you culpable to be personally accused of poor interpretation. Worse yet, if you were to be misled by a stranger on the internet in a professional setting, you may be thought of as a fool. I offer you no solutions, but I do see the de-emphasis of personal relationships as a major obstacle to building trust for the trustless systems among institutions. Just because that it's a DeFi app that's trustless doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a customer support line. So, how to verify? Well, perhaps we must also consider if an easily verifiable trustless system would even need such reassurances. If what drives entities and individuals to trust individuals over trustless systems is unfamiliarity and difficulty to do verification, conceivably, what's needed is an easier and more transparent verification process. Maybe the issue is not in the trustless system, but how the trustless system presents itself. Right now, the industry standard has been for trustless protocols to get an audit that shows they are trustless. This is an oxymoron, as you are trusting the auditor to remain impartial and also trusting the protocol that it will actually deploy the code that it has sent to the auditor. Many scams have gotten an audit to give a semblance of trust, only to eventually rug the project because they deployed a code that wasn't in the audit. They're not obliged to actually deploy what they gave to the auditor, and the auditor is not obliged to keep checking up once the audit is done. The way you package something makes the difference for mass adoption. And right now, the verification of trustless system is not accessible to the public. It's not accessibly packaged for almost anyone that hasn't taken hours of time to learn a whole new subject that they're entirely unfamiliar with. Does this not apply to how you present your trustless system? To make it presentable so that people will understand what it actually does? It's not that hard to add comments on GitHub. I do it all the time. Through it all, blockchain has been the potential to be the catalyst for a huge paradigm shift in the way business is done. For any shift to be successful, there needs to be things in place to make the transition to the new normal easier for those unfamiliar. Accessible, reusable, reliable verification at a human touch is just one such area where I see an opportunity for change. And I have spent literally basically my whole life in crypto. And I really do believe in it. And the way that things are going, when forgive my language, but when things hit the fan, we had an opportunity to innovate in a more trustless way, or to fall back on the trusted system and have regulators look after us, and to say that things are okay. And it seems like we're moving more in that direction when there is actually an alternative. I want all of us who believe in this cryptocurrency dream, blockchain dream, that we all have taken sacrifices and risks to be in, to ask ourselves, and I quote the late Fa Mulan, "Who is that girl I see staring back right at me? When will my reflection show who I am inside?" Thank you very much.